I got nightmares in my head, I fear thoughts build up until I can't hear. That my mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper. I got nightmares in my head, I fear the thoughts build up until I can't hear. That my mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. I can't speak for other true crime creators, but I made it policy not to show any photos of Heuermann's family, his wife or children, because to do that would be to re-victimize them. But that changed when Asa elected to make deals with Netflix and the Peacock channel, the latter apparently a 7-figure deal. And so, as soon as you do that, I feel, this is my opinion, you hand over a presumption of a right to privacy because you're offering to be in front of the cameras. You're giving yourself over to be a public figure for money. I'm going to keep this one short. Having been back to the glittering towers of Midtown Manhattan, including up to the teetering top of the Empire State, and then going all the way down to Massapequa Park, that seismic shift in circumstances that I thought was so important only seems even more so now. If Heuermann's home speaks of brokenness, neglect, disaffection, dysfunction, and perhaps ordinary old disappointment, we can see some of that brokenness, I guess, in his family. And I say this with sensitivity and with sympathy, but if Manhattan is about towering ambition and the triumph of the human spirit, Heuermann's family seem more down to earth. They seem to be struggling with very mortal and mundane issues, things like health problems, to name one. The thing I really want to deal with is the strange way that we seem to be dealing with this case of late. But before we get to that, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. Bear in mind, I'll be doing the next episode in the Amaral versus the McCanns. I'll be doing that a little bit later today, so watch out for that. I also plan to bring out another episode in the Karen Reed case. If you're enjoying this episode, please like, share, leave a comment. You can also hit the thanks button, and let's get started. Now, there's been some discussion lately that Asa may be a possible protagonist in Heuermann's alleged crimes. I must say, I don't get it. Right in the beginning, in mid-July, like months ago, it was reported that Asa's DNA was found on the victims, and no one said much about it. Heuermann was the focus, and rightly so. Do you remember the article, Wife's DNA on the bodies found at Gilgo Beach led to arrest of Rex Heuermann? It didn't lead to the arrest of Asa Ellerup. So are we going to see the arrest of Asa Ellerup? Well, clearly not. So I'm not quite sure why certain news platforms are seemingly suggesting that. In any event, let's look at the context. According to an article from, Pix11.com, quote, Suffolk County Police said that 4 female hairs later tied to Heuermann's wife were found on the bodies of 3 victims discovered at Gilgo Beach in December 2010. Now, the way I understand that, they were able to match those hairs to her based on the DNA found on those hairs. 2 female hairs were on Megan Waterman, including one on the tape wrapped around Waterman's head, according to authorities. Now, you may remember in the Laurie Vallow case, I think one of Laurie's hairs was found on the tape wrapped around JJ. Well, does that mean that Laurie was involved in that case? And you might say yes. Well, in this case, you had 2 female hairs. Well, does that mean that Asa was involved in this case? A female hair was also found in tape used to wrap burlap around the victim Amber Costello. Finally, a female hair was detected in a belt buckle found on Maureen Brainard Barnes's body, according to the authorities. In July and until now, Heuermann has not been charged with Brainard Barnes's murder, But according to the article, prosecutors said he's the top suspect and he could face more charges pertaining to the original Gilgo 4 victims. In other words, at the moment, Heuermann is associated with the Gilgo 3 group, and possibly a fourth victim might be added at a later date. Going further in the article, quote, on or about July 21, 2022, an undercover Suffolk County detective recovered 11 bottles from the Heuermann's family trash on First Avenue in Massapequa Park, according to court documents. Now, it wouldn't be difficult to do that. There seems to be quite a lot of trash lying around. I actually walked past that house in Massapequa Park myself. There's kind of trash lying all over the place, a lot of clutter. The Suffolk County Crime Lab swabbed the bottles for DNA. I do wonder what those 11 bottles were. 11 bottles of what? On February 24, 2023, a forensic lab concluded that one of the DNA profiles from the bottles matched the forensic evidence retrieved from the 3 victims at the Gilgo Beach discovery sites. Now, what that tells you is that it matches the DNA on the hair, right? They found DNA on the bottles and they matched it to DNA on the hair. The testing indicated forensic experts were ruling out more than 99% of the North American female population. Anyway, there's also a very simple reason why it's just dumb to be having this conversation about Asa as a perpetrator or as an accomplice. It was established way back that whenever any of Heuermann's imputed victims vanished or weren't heard from, well, where was Asa? Well, she was out of town. Heuermann was at home, and she wasn't. Not just out of town, out of state. It was actually starting to look like the evidence on the bodies were all from Asa, and what they really needed was something from Heuermann, and they eventually collected a single male hair from the burlap used to wrap Megan Waterman. And then eventually they were able to match that hair to DNA found on that pizza box. Remember that? Now, the crazy thing is, and this article came out in July this year, and yet almost 6 months after we knew all of this, the Asa narrative has suddenly made a huge comeback. News Nation's been talking about, and quite a few big channels have been doing the rounds as well, that could she be a suspect? Well, I'm covering it just to say how silly it is to be covering it. I suppose it's been covered firstly because no one can think of anything else to talk about. There doesn't seem to be any content on this case. There's not much happening, I guess, and so let's manufacture content. Secondly, Asa's going to be famous. She's going to be in these documentaries, and a big deal is going to be made of her story, and so perhaps this is about getting onto that bandwagon. But just trying to make out that she's a suspect is, as I say, I don't think it's makes any sense if you're seriously dealing with this case. But that's not the only dodgy analysis I've seen associated with this case. There's been a lot of excitement that bodies are going to turn up in South Carolina. None have, and I predict none will. Bodies are going to turn up in Vegas, ditto. In other words, a similar spiel that we saw with Brian Kohberger. People seem to lose their shit when you're dealing with a serial killer. It's almost like this free-for-all. There are going to be dozens of bodies, and it's just going to go on and on and on. It's like, oh, are we dealing with a serial killer? Well, then there must be more bodies, and more bodies equal more content. And that's where the interest level then lies. I think this shows a deplorable lack of knowing how serial killers think. I think it also shows in a way how some people in true crime think. Shock value, sensational, let's go according to that. I made the prediction with Kohberger, and I'll repeat it now with Heuermann. There will be 0 additional bodies supposedly connected to the Long Island serial killer case outside of Long Island, because that's not how certainly not how this serial killer works. I've also made the unpopular claim that Sharon Gilbert has nothing to do with the Long Island serial killer thing, and I think the videos I've made so far on that just seen subscribers unsubscribe. I don't want to hear that. I want to hear that she is connected to it. Sorry, that's not what this channel does. make no mistake, I know what's popular and I know what my audience and audiences want to hear. I'm not here to tell you what you want to hear. I'm here to tell you the truth.
I'm going to find out the truth. I guarantee you that.
Bear in mind, if we're going to go down this road of wanting dead people to be victims so that we can collectively be shocked by how monstrous he is, not because of logic or evidence or common sense, then I suppose it makes sense to want to imagine that Asa is 4 times more likely to be the brains behind the serial killings, because 4 of her hairs were found as opposed to Heuermann's just 1. But correlation is not the same as causation. It saddens me that, having trodden the streets, retraced Heuermann's commute, which I still haven't told you fully about, I haven't told you about that in all that much detail, and done handwriting analysis based on walking in his shoes, people haven't seemed particularly interested. I guess it's not shocking enough. I heard the news today, there's a lot of money in bullshit. Ain't that the truth? And it seems to be so now more than ever. To be clear, I don't think Asa is involved whatsoever in this case, but her hairs do suggest the killer may have brought the victim somewhere where she had been, a vehicle or a room in the house, perhaps even the master bedroom. I do think Asa is involved in a psychological sense where the killer was perhaps not satisfied, not happy, not fulfilled in a certain way, but that is going into the psychology, that's going into the dynamics, that's certainly not going into what we mean by involved in a sort of a direct and deliberate sense, criminal involvement. I think Asa was involved in the sense that she wasn't involved, that she wasn't living her best life and perhaps her partner wanted to. Unlike many trying to push the maximum shock value narrative, what I find fascinating in the story is if the suspect killed 4 people and no more, a lot of people want it to be more, but if it's true that he killed 4 people or 3 people and no more, what made him start? What was the trigger? And also what made him stop? I have a working theory, but I can't help wondering what influence Heuermann's biological daughter had on her father, perhaps on settling him, perhaps on humanizing him, perhaps her growing up into a woman turned him into a more fully fledged human himself. It's just a theory. And let's remember, Heuermann still has the presumption of innocence. He's innocent until proven guilty. But as things stand, based on available information, the Gilgo Beach killings ended with Amber Costello, his 4th victim, in September 2010. 13 years ago, Victoria was 13 years old, Heuermann's daughter. She was just entering puberty, and one imagines after that, Heuermann as a parent would have had his hands full. He would also have had, one imagines, a deeper sense not only of Victoria as a human being, this young child, this girl, becoming a woman, but also a person, a fully fledged person, but also of all people as human beings, as he witnessed this period of her growing up. Victoria would later get a job just down the road from Heuermann's office at Macy's, and after that she actually worked for her father in the same office. One can't imagine him encouraging that or allowing that if he was still in the serial killer stage. And someone left a comment saying, I hope that she was safe. Well, nobody is safe if you're living at close quarters with a serial killer. No one is safe. So was she potentially part of the factors that got him to stop? If so, or if not, what triggered him into getting started? And again, this is assuming that he is the right suspect for this case. Remember, he married Asa in April 1996, but Heuermann's first victim, as far as we know, and allegedly, was Melissa Bartholomew, who disappeared on July 12, 2009. I'm not going to take it further than that, but I do want to share something that is a little bit personal. I hope that's okay. I hope it's not too self-indulgent. I feel, I guess, particularly close to the Long Island serial killer case because I was staying in a hotel in Midtown Manhattan a few months ago. And that hotel was in the same street, in fact, just 300 feet from Heuermann's office. And of course, it was my first time in America. It was very moving and, emotional for many different reasons. Being in New York, there was a slight sense of arrival and celebration, but also of humility. And of all the places I could have stayed in New York, where was I? I was just down the road from a serial killer, and I am a true crime creator. Also, I left Heuermann's stomping ground literally a month before he was arrested. Just think of that in terms of timing. Years and years and years of someone on the loose, and then they are arrested a month after you are in that exact area. And that was the first time I'd ever been to America. When I returned to the States in October, the first place I wanted to go back to was that area. And the intuitive sense I'd had that the Empire State Building was likely a large part of the symbolic fabric of the case, and also part of the psychological fabric. As I said earlier in this video, well, that gut feel only grew after returning to New York. When you stand at the office door of the building, and you just turn to the right, well, what shoots out of the ground like a rocket right over your shoulder? Right there, well, the Empire State Building. So that would be something that he would see every time he went to work, every time he came out the building, every time he went from that building to the train back to Massapequa. But it's not just personal because of that encounter and that experience. It also goes much further than that. I also identify with the architectural side of the story. My father is a builder. He dealt with architects all the time. My sister's a qualified architect. I studied building science for a few years. I studied the history of architecture. And once upon a time, I actually thought I would take over my dad's building business. I also strongly considered becoming an architect. I think the only reason I didn't was I applied too late, at university. So I'm fascinated by the notion of a link between landscape and memory, or more specifically, how shapes and structures, often man-made, but also even environmental shapes, determine how we think about ourselves, how physical shapes determine the shape of our psychology, and thus our place in this world. And what does that lead to? Feelings of inspiration or frustration, or both? New York is a particularly triggering landscape psychologically. And here we have a murder suspect that's, of all things, an architect. Psychologically, I find that really, really interesting. Is anyone talking about that? Is that coincidence, or is there some sort of psychological design built into the operative criminal psychology? Well, time will tell. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.